The 7 Deadly Innocent Frauds of Economic Policy. Written by Warren Mosler. Deadly Innocent Fraud Number 2. With government deficits, we are leaving our debt burden to our children. Fact. Collectively, in real terms, there is no such burden possible. Debt or no debt, our children get to consume whatever they can produce. This deadly innocent fraud is often the first answer most people give to what they perceive to be the main problem associated with government deficit spending. Borrowing now means paying for today's spending later. Or, as commonly seen and heard in the media, higher deficits today mean higher taxes tomorrow. And paying later means that somehow our children's real standard of living and general well-being will be lowered in the future because of our deficit spending now. Professional economists call this the intergenerational debt issue. It is thought that if the federal government deficit spends, it is somehow leaving the real burden of today's expenditures to be paid for by future generations. And the numbers are staggering. But, fortunately, like all of the 7 deadly innocent frauds, it is all readily dismissed in a way that can be easily understood. In fact, the idea of our children being somehow necessarily deprived of real goods and services in the future because of what's called the national debt is nothing less than ridiculous. Here's a story that illustrates the point. Several years ago, I ran into former Senator and Governor of Connecticut, Lowell Weicker, and his wife Claudia on a boat dock in St. Croix. I asked Governor Weicker what was wrong with the country's fiscal policy. He replied, "We have to stop running up these deficits and leaving the burden of paying for today's spending to our children." So I then asked him the following questions to hopefully illustrate the hidden flaw in his logic. When our children build 15 million cars per year 20 years from now, will they have to send them back in time to 2008 to pay off their debt? Are we still sending real goods and services back in time to 1945 to pay off the lingering debt from World War II? And today, as I run for the U.S. Senate in Connecticut, nothing has changed. The ongoing theme of the other candidates is that we are borrowing from the likes of China to pay for today's spending and leaving our children and grandchildren to pay the bill. Of course, we all know we don't send real goods and services back in time to pay off federal government deficits, and that our children won't have to do that either. Nor is there any reason government spending from previous years should prevent our children from going to work and producing all the goods and services they are capable of producing. And in our children's future, just like today, whoever is alive will be able to go to work and produce and consume their real output of goods and services. No matter how many U.S. Treasury securities are outstanding. There is no such thing as giving up current year output to the past, and sending it back in time to previous generations. Our children won't and can't pay us back for anything we leave them, even if they wanted to. Nor is the financing of deficit spending anything of any consequence. When government spends, it just changes numbers up in our bank accounts. More specifically, all the commercial banks we use for our banking have bank accounts at the Fed called reserve accounts. Foreign governments have reserve accounts at the Fed as well. These reserve accounts at the Fed are just like checking accounts at any other bank. When government spends without taxing, all it does is change the numbers up in the appropriate checking account, reserve account, at the Fed. This means that when the government makes a $2,000 Social Security payment to you, for example, it changes the number up in your bank's checking account at the Fed by $2,000. Which also automatically changes the number up in your account at your bank by $2,000. Next, you need to know what a U.S. Treasury security actually is. A U.S. Treasury security is nothing more than a savings account at the Fed. When you buy a Treasury security, you send your dollars to the Fed and then sometime in the future, they send the dollars back plus interest. The same holds true for any savings account at any bank. You send the bank dollars and you get them back plus interest. Let's say that your bank decides to buy $2,000 worth of Treasury securities. To pay for those Treasury securities, the Fed reduces the number of dollars that your bank has in its checking account at the Fed by $2,000 and adds $2,000 to your bank's savings account at the Fed. I'm calling the Treasury securities savings accounts, which is all they are. In other words, when the U.S. government does what's called borrowing money, all it does is move funds from checking accounts at the Fed to savings accounts, Treasury securities, at the Fed. In fact, the entire $13 trillion national debt is nothing more than the economy's total holdings of savings accounts at the Fed. And what happens when the Treasury securities come due, and that debt has to be paid back? Yes, you guessed it, the Fed merely shifts the dollar balances from the savings accounts, Treasury securities, at the Fed to the appropriate checking accounts at the Fed, reserve accounts. Nor is this anything new. It's been done exactly like this for a very long time, and no one seems to understand how simple it is and that it never will be a problem. Federal government taxing and spending does influence distribution. Distribution is about who gets all the goods and services that are produced. In fact, this is what politicians do every time they pass legislation. They redirect real goods and services by decree, for better or worse. And the odds of doing it for better are substantially decreased when they don't understand the 7 deadly innocent frauds. Each year, for example, Congress discusses tax policy, always with an eye to the distribution of income and spending. Many seek to tax those who can most afford it and direct federal spending to those in need. And they also decide how to tax interest, capital gains, estates, etc., as well as how to tax income. All of these are distributional issues. In addition, Congress decides who the government hires and fires, who it buys things from, and who gets direct payments. Congress also makes laws that directly affect many other aspects of prices and incomes. Foreigners who hold U.S. dollars are particularly at risk. They earn those dollars from selling us real goods and services, yet they have no assurance that they will be able to buy real goods and services from us in the future. Prices could go up, inflation, and the U.S. government could legally impose all kinds of taxes on anything foreigners wish to buy from us, which reduces their spending power. Think of all those cars Japan sold to us for under $2,000 years ago. They've been holding those dollars in their savings accounts at the Fed, they own U.S. Treasury securities, and if they now would want to spend those dollars, they would probably have to pay in excess of $20,000 per car to buy cars from us. What can they do about the higher prices? Call the manager and complain? They've traded millions of perfectly good cars to us in exchange for credit balances on the Fed's books that can buy only what we allow them to buy. And look at what happened recently, the Federal Reserve cut rates, which reduced the interest Japan earns on its U.S. Treasury securities. This discussion continues in a subsequent innocent fraud. This is all perfectly legal and business as usual, as each year's output is divided up among the living. None of the real output gets thrown away because of outstanding debt, no matter how large. Nor does outstanding debt reduce output and employment, except of course when ill-informed policymakers decide to take anti-deficit measures that do reduce output and employment. Unfortunately, that is currently the case, and that is why this is a deadly innocent fraud. Today, April 15, 2010. It's clear that Congress is taking more spending power away from us in taxes than is needed to make room for their own spending. Even after we spend what we want and the government does all of its massive spending, there's still a lot left unsold in that big department store called the economy. How do we know that? Easy. Count the bodies in the unemployment lines. Look at the massive amount of excess capacity in the economy. Look at what the Fed calls the output gap, which is the difference between what we could produce at full employment and what we are now producing. It's enormous. Sure, there's a record deficit in national debt, which, you now know, means that we all have that much in savings accounts at the Fed called Treasury securities. Incidentally, the cumulative U.S. budget deficit, adjusted for the size of the economy, is still far below Japan's. Far below most of Europe and very far below the World War II U.S. deficits that got us out of the Depression, with no debt burden consequences. If you've gotten this far into this book, you may already know why the size of the deficit isn't a financial issue. So hopefully, you know that taxes function to regulate the economy, and not to raise revenue, as Congress thinks. When I look at today's economy, it's screaming at me that the problem is that people don't have enough money to spend. It's not telling me they have too much spending power and are overspending. Who would not agree? Unemployment has doubled and GDP is more than 10% below where it would be if Congress wasn't overtaxing us and taking so much spending power away from us. When we operate at less than our potential, at less than full employment, then we are depriving our children of the real goods and services we could be producing on their behalf. Likewise, when we cut back on our support of higher education, we are depriving our children of the knowledge they'll need to be the very best they can be in their future. So also, when we cut back on basic research and space exploration, we are depriving our children of all the fruits of that labor that instead we are transferring to the unemployment lines. So yes, those alive get to consume this year's output, and also get to decide to use some of the output as investment goods and services, which should increase future output. And yes, Congress has a big say in who consumes this year's output. Potential distributional issues due to previous federal deficits can be readily addressed by Congress and distribution can be legally altered to their satisfaction. So how do we pay off China? Those worried about paying off the national debt can't possibly understand how it all works at the operational, nuts and bolts, debits and credits, level. Otherwise they would realize that question is entirely inapplicable. What they don't understand is that both dollars and U.S. Treasury debt, securities, are nothing more than accounts, which are nothing more than numbers that the government makes on its own books. So let's start by looking at how we got to where we are today with China. It all started when China wanted to sell things to us and we wanted to buy them. For example, let's suppose that the U.S. Army wanted to buy $1 billion worth of uniforms from China, and China wanted to sell $1 billion worth of uniforms to the U.S. Army at that price. So the Army buys $1 billion worth of uniforms from China. First, understand that both parties are happy. There is no imbalance. China would rather have the $1 billion than the uniforms or they wouldn't have sold them. And the U.S. Army would rather have the uniforms than the money or it wouldn't have bought them. The transactions are all voluntary, and all in U.S. dollars. But back to our point, how does China get paid? China has a reserve account at the Federal Reserve Bank. To quickly review, a reserve account is nothing more than a fancy name for a checking account. It's the Federal Reserve Bank, so they call it a reserve account instead of a checking account. To pay China, the Fed adds $1 billion to China's checking account at the Fed. It does this by changing the numbers in China's checking account up by $1 billion. The numbers don't come from anywhere any more than the numbers on a scoreboard at a football come from anywhere. China then has some choices. It can do nothing and keep the $1 billion in its checking account at the Fed, or it can buy U.S. Treasury securities. Again, to quickly review, a U.S. Treasury security is nothing more than a fancy name for a savings account at the Fed. The buyer gives the Fed money, and gets it back later with interest. That's what a savings account is. You give a bank money and you get it back later with interest. So let's say China buys a 1-year Treasury security. All that happens is that the Fed subtracts $1 billion from China's checking account at the Fed, and adds $1 billion to China's savings account at the Fed. And all that happens a year later when China's 1-year Treasury bill comes due is that the Fed removes this money from China's savings account at the Fed, including interest, and adds it to China's checking account at the Fed. Right now, China is holding some $2 trillion of U.S. Treasury securities. So what do we do when they mature and it's time to pay China back? We remove those dollars from their savings account at the Fed and add them to their checking account at the Fed, and wait for them to say what, if anything, they might want to do next. This is what happens when all U.S. government debt comes due, which happens continuously. The Fed removes dollars from savings accounts and adds dollars to checking accounts on its books. When people buy Treasury securities, the Fed removes dollars from their checking accounts and adds them to their savings accounts. So what's all the fuss? It's all a tragic misunderstanding. China knows we don't need them for financing our deficits and is playing us for fools. Today, that includes Geithner, Clinton, Obama, Summers and the rest of the administration. It also includes Congress and the media. Now let me describe this all in a more technical manner for those of you who may be interested. When a Treasury bill, note or bond is purchased by a bank, for example, the government makes two entries on its spreadsheet that we call the monetary system. First, it debits, subtracts from, the buyer's reserve account, checking account, at the Fed. Then it increases, credits, the buyer's securities account, savings account, at the Fed. As before, the government simply changes numbers on its own spreadsheet. One number gets changed down and another gets changed up. And when the dreaded day arrives, and the Treasury securities which China holds come due and need to be repaid, the Fed again simply changes two numbers on its own spreadsheet. The Fed debits, subtracts from, China's securities account at the Fed. And then it credits, adds to, China's reserve, checking, account at the Fed. That's all, debt paid. China now has its money back. It has a very large US dollar balance in its checking account at the Fed. If it wants anything else, cars, boats, real estate, other currencies, it has to buy them at market prices from a willing seller who wants dollar deposits in return. And if China does buy something, the Fed will subtract that amount from China's checking account and add that amount to the checking account of whomever China bought it all from. Notice too, that paying off China doesn't change China's stated US dollar wealth. They simply have dollars in a checking account rather than US Treasury securities, a savings account, of equal dollars. And if they want more Treasury securities instead, no problem, the Fed just moves their US dollars from their checking account to their savings account again, by appropriately changing the numbers. Paying off the entire US national debt is but a matter of subtracting the value of the maturing securities from one account at the Fed, and adding that value to another account at the Fed. These transfers are non-events for the real economy and not the source of dire stress presumed by mainstream economists, politicians, business people, and the media. One more time, to pay off the national debt the government changes two entries in its own spreadsheet, a number that says how many securities are owned by the private sector is changed down and another number that says how many US dollars are being kept at the Fed in reserve accounts is changed up. Nothing more. Debt paid. All creditors have their money back. What's the big deal? So what happens if China refuses to buy our debt at current low interest rates paid to them? Interest rates have to go up to attract their purchase of the Treasury securities, right? Wrong. They can leave it in their checking account. It's of no consequence to a government that understands its own monetary system. The funds are not used for spending, as previously described. There are no negative consequences of funds being in a checking account at the Fed rather than a savings account at the Fed. What happens if China says, "We don't want to keep a checking account at the Fed anymore. Pay us in gold or some other means of exchange"? They simply do not have this option under our current fiat currency system, as they would have known when they sold the uniforms to the US Army and had the money put into their checking account at the Fed. If they want something other than dollars, they have to buy it from a willing seller, just like the rest of us do when we spend our dollars. Someday it will be our children changing numbers on what will be their spreadsheet, just as seamlessly as we did, and our parents did, though hopefully with a better understanding. But for now, the deadly innocent fraud of leaving the national debt to our children continues to drive policy, and keeps us from optimizing output and employment. The lost output and depreciated human capital is the real price we and our children are paying now that diminishes both the present and the future. We make do with less than what we can produce and sustain high levels of unemployment, along with all the associated crime, family problems and medical issues, while our children are deprived of the real investments that would have been made on their behalf if we knew how to keep our human resources fully employed and productive.